Hi, and welcome to How to Second Gen, a series of conversations with people who grew up in a different country than their parents. On this podcast, we explore questions of belonging, culture clash, confused identities, and being the kid with the weird food for lunch. I'm your host, Mark Hiew. My guests on this episode are the Won brothers, Andrew and Jonathan, who share their personal stories with food growing up in a Peruvian-Chinese-Colombian family on their food channel, HungryWons. We discuss their family's unique mix of Latino, Chinese, and American culture, and how it shows up in CHIFA, a culinary style based on Cantonese elements fused with Peruvian ingredients and traditions, as well as their childhood growing up riding the 7-line subway train in Queens, New York. All right, and on this episode, I got the Won brothers, Jonathan and Andrew. What's up, guys?
What's up, man? It's been a while.
Yeah, it has.
Thanks for having us, Mark.
Thanks for joining. Andrew and I went to college together many years ago, and I discovered recently a cool side project that he's working on Facebook. And I was like, I got to get this guy on the podcast, and so he's going to tell us more about that. But why don't I have you guys introduce yourselves? Maybe we'll start with Jonathan.
Yeah. Hey, guys. I'm Jonathan. Everyone calls me Jonah for short. It's my nickname, but I'm 33. I'm the younger half of the HungryWons by, 2.5 years. And I'm based here in New York. I was a former finance guy for almost about 9 years. And about 22 months ago, sort of dropped everything I had, started working in kitchens, and eventually made my way up, and I'm sort of working in that hospitality culinary field right now, and up here in New York, but currently furloughed because of the pandemic, of course.
Hey guys, I'm Andrew. Like Mark said, we hadn't spoken or connected in like more than almost 15 years. So I was like, I don't even know Mark who, but then I was like, oh yeah, I remember Mark. But yeah, we met at University of Maryland, right? Like we did that class together with Professor Blum back in the day on conflict resolution, which I thought was actually a really cool class.
It was, yeah, for sure.
But yeah, just a little bit about myself. I'm down here in Washington, D.C. area. I've been here for almost 10 years now. I started out doing health economics and public health. I worked in that area for like 8 years. I got to travel the world. It was amazing. Worked a lot in Africa and Southeast Asia and Bangladesh as well. And then I kind of dropped everything and just followed a dream and took a shot at playing professional poker. That was a roller coaster. It's still a roller coaster, but it's been fun. I've learned a lot, cried a lot. But most recently, I started Nobuya Travelers, which is food-inspired tours of South America and Asia. Unfortunately, that's kind of been put on hold a little bit, but we're super excited to do HungryWons because we love to eat, man, and we've just been experimenting with our Peruvian-Chinese-Colombian background and just eating a lot of good food and filming it.
Sure, man. Let's get into it. There's so much that I'm excited to get into. Why don't we start though with your parents? You'll have a Chinese sounding name, but there's Latin America, there's other places happening, and I'm curious how that all happened. But why don't we get into that story via your parents? Like who are they? How'd they meet? Where are they from? Where did they live?
It goes back. I can let Jonathan tell a little bit about his side, but from what I know and talking to my grandparents and my parents, it's funny. Most people that are Chinese, the last name is W-O-N-G. So it's Wong. So when they see W-O-N, they're like, what the hell is wrong with your name? But it was because when he went to Peru, he didn't really speak Spanish well. He spoke Chinese. And they dropped the G when he was getting his residency, and he didn't ever get it changed. So everyone in Peru is W-O-N-G, except for a few who are W-O-N. And didn't bother to get it changed. So that's kind of the story. And he, to take a step back, my grandfather was born in like 1915, I think it was, in Guangzhou. It used to be called Canton in South China. And then my grandmother was born a little bit later. She was 7 or 8 years older in 1922 in Lima, Peru. So she was actually born in Peru. Not many Asians were in Peru in the 1920s, but she was born there. Then she was orphaned when she was like 5 years old and sent back to Macau, which was at that time a Portuguese colony right next to Hong Kong, which is now like the casino capital of the world. And she was raised there for a while, and then they didn't meet until my grandfather was taking a trip to Macau, met her, and then they got married in like a few days, and then they went back to Peru together. So that's kind of the grandparent side story. And then I could tell, I mean, Jonathan, do you know the story with Mommy and Papi and how they met?
Yeah, I mean, from what I can remember, I think my dad had gotten, a full ride to Wisconsin, Eau Claire, after working his butt off at, I think, a Christian Maryknoll like high school in Lima. And his older sister, my tia, she's the first one to have come to the United States. And I think at that time she'd established herself. She was working at the United Nations. Just so happens my mom was also working there as well. And I think it was a family or a Christmas party where, eventually they started dancing together. I think my dad stepped on my mom's foot and, she cursed him out in Spanish, not knowing, that he would be able to understand her. And then Andrew was born a few months later. No.
Hold up. So I might have, they were colleagues at the United Nations?
So no, my father's sister and my mom were colleagues at the United Nations. So that's how they met. I think it was a holiday party that, my dad was a +1 and, they just hit it off from there.
Got it. So your dad moves from Peru to the States for college, and then he ends up moving to New York. And your mom is from New York?
No, so my mom is from Bogota, Colombia, and she was born there. They were really poor, and she was able to make it over when she was like 17 or 18 with her sister to New York. She didn't really speak much English, so she cleaned houses for a while when she got here, and then she was taking night classes in English, and then she kind of picked it up really well. She picked up French as well, and obviously she spoke Spanish. So then back then they took like a translator. She took a translator test at the UN, and she was able to pass, and that's how she got her first job. She never went to like formal college. She took some classes, I think, but never formal college. So yeah, it's a pretty crazy story. You think about now, to just like walk in somewhere and be like, "Can I apply for this job?" I never went to college or anything.
Right on. And what is her like ethnic heritage?
So we did. That's funny you asked. We did like one of those MyHeritage DNA things, and we were blown away because the results were like, holy shit. Because we're like 5.5 or 6% Jewish on my mom's side.
You didn't know?
I had no idea. Like, how would I know? So my mom is like she's like, I think like 60% like native, indigenous, Indian American, and whatever was there in Colombia. So I guess Inca, Mayan. And then the other is European. So she has Spanish and like Jewish and a little bit of everything else. But it goes back, she was in Colombia for like hundreds of years. So it's kind of hard to trace exactly what it is, but yeah.
Got it. That's cool. Let's come back to your dad for a second. So he grows up in Lima, applies, gets into college in the States. How do you end up in New York?
So if you're taking a step back, if you want to talk about kind of how hard it was, my dad was actually born in Pisco, which I don't know if you heard of Pisco sours before, the drink.
Yeah.
So the town where they originated from is called Pisco, Peru, and it's south of Lima in the desert, like 4 hours south. So he was actually born there, and then when he was like 4 or 5 years old, that's when they moved, because they used to work like on a farm, and then they moved to Lima. And when they moved to Lima, they owned hotels. Actually, it's an interesting story. They owned hotels in Lima, being like Chinese immigrants, and it was really successful until my dad got tuberculosis, like in the my grandfather in the 1950s. And back then they didn't have really good health insurance programs, so he paid out of pocket, and he was in the hospital for like 5 or 6 months, and they went kind of broke, and they had to sell the hotels that they were really successful. And he barely survived. Like, he was like severely scarred from TB in the lungs, obviously. But then my dad, he's one of 4 total. Like, he has one brother and 2 sisters. And in Lima, it's interesting because there was a lot of Peruvian Chinese, but you definitely got caught, like from what I saw, like living there and visiting there over the years, was like, you definitely were identified as Chinese, even though you were Peruvian and born there. You were like, they would call it, El Chino or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like the Chinese. So it was like, but like you accepted it as a term of endearment most of the time. But I feel like it still could hurt you if like you were like, but yeah, I'm Chinese, but that's not how I identify, right? I identify like as Peruvian, like you. We were born and raised here, right?
Right. He eventually made his way to New York and went to VOSH New York, which is the predominant New York State College in New York of optometry. Got his OD there.
No, SUNY. It was called SUNY, not VOSH New York.
Yeah,
it was
College
the
of
state.
Optometry. Yeah, SUNY New York. But yeah, VOSH is his sort of, again, his nonprofit passion project that he started after he had his practice in place for, at that time, over 20 years.
Got it.
So yeah, he actually just recently, has moved into a retirement stage, but, for almost 4 decades, he was there in Jackson Heights in the heart of Queens, which is where his practice was. And sort of getting back to what Andrew was saying, when we were maybe about like 10, 13 years old, he had started, going to Guatemala and Central America and helping out, and eventually became the president of the New York chapter. And then, sort of became a summer thing for us to sort of go on these 2 to 3 week adventures, 6 really hard clinic days, seeing thousands of people that, some of whom, might have walked a couple miles, just to get their first eye exam ever, or any general exam for that matter. So that was sort of a way to us, for him to show us the world and sort of, open our eyes to how things really are, not just in the United States or, or more well-off countries per se. And of course, we sort of had a little mini family vacation afterwards. And, so a lot of those trips were in Central America, were in Peru. So that's sort of where we became, really familiar with, all the different regions, having, chance to travel to Arequipa or Pisco or into the jungles, Machu Picchu, Cusco, of course. And so, that sort of helped us, again, see where we really came from. And
let's talk about being Chinese in Peru / Central America. You touched on it. You all have spent some time down there. What's that like?
I would say, like, going back, it's pretty amazing because, I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, there was like 200,000 specifically Chinese from southern China, from Guangzhou, that immigrated to Peru to work on railroads and farms, agriculture. And that's a huge community, right? Because you extrapolate that over years and that grows and the mixing happens, right? But I think what's really different than in the US is it's just the underlying cultural differences that South America has to America, right? In terms of like personalities of South Americans, like there's a lot more warmth, I think, and closeness between people on the average. Obviously, there's nice people everywhere and there's mean people everywhere, but like that transfers. And what I saw that interestingly is like when a Peruvian Chinese is born in Peru, they're so much more warm off the bat than if you go to like a random place in China. It's a different type of warmth. It's a more like South American warmth where like you kiss and you hug always, and it's like an insult if you don't.
Oh, they actually do that. They kiss and hug, Peruvian-Chinese.
Yeah, they kiss and hug, and they offer you food, and if you don't eat the food, they're like, "What the hell is wrong with you?"
Because I feel like Chinese people, in generalizing, don't touch each other when they meet.
only in the buffet lines when they're trying to get past it.
Right, elbows only. Definitely no kisses, man.
Yeah. So like, no, yeah. I mean, I think it's been integrated so much. There was a very famous Japanese Peruvian president of Peru that got in a lot of trouble, Alberto Fujimori.
That's right. Corruption or something?
Corruption, and then his family is all in politics, and like the daughter has run for president as well. So it goes deep, the tradition of Asian immigrants in Peru, and then like so many generations since then. Another funny story is a really popular, going back to your connection with Whole Foods. And by the way, we need the hookup. We need this 10% employee discount. Hookup, by the way.
I'll see what I can do.
No, but like E Wong is one of the nicest and most popular supermarkets in Peru. And I think it got bought but anyway, it was around for many, many years. and it was the Wong family, and everyone thought that when they met us, they're like, "Oh man, you're rich," and we're like, "Shit, we're missing the G though. We're not part of that family."
It sounds like it's really integrated, man. Like the Chinese have been there a long time. And like there are Chinese in Peru who don't speak Chinese and are like 100% Peruvian. Would you say that they totally assimilate and the culture sort of made them or they wanted to? Or do they maintain it? Do they still have connections to China? Do they still consider it the motherland or anything like that?
I think it's just like the U.S., where it's more about how the family or how the person, their personality, meaning like, are they making friends that are not people like them, or are they more kind of like closed off and they only speak in their native tongue at home, and they only hang around with like people that are like them, which happens in the US too, right?
Yeah.
Where you have immigrant families that are like, they only hung out with other Mexican Americans, and they don't really hang out with like Asians, even though they might live right next door, right? But then you have ones like, for example, Jonna and I, we're not really accepted by Asians, I guess, because we don't have many Asian friends other than our family, like, and you.
Yeah.
Like, we don't really hang out with that many Asian friends per se. And I think it's also because, like, I mean, this is just how I feel personally. Like, Asians can be kind of really cliquey too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where like, it's like Korean Americans or Chinese Americans, but then even within that, like people that have come a long time ago versus people that have come more recently, right? And they kind of have their own groups. I've noticed that most in basketball leagues, where I was just like, yo, let me join your team. And they're like, oh, we got our team already. And I was like, shit.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like, yeah, you've got a mix. Just like here in America, we have, just focusing on Asians for a second, Asian Americans who've been here like 4 or 5 generations. And I've met Asian Americans who their parents are like fully, say, Chinese or Japanese or Korean, but they don't speak that language, and they may feel regret about it, or they don't, because they're just like straight up, I'm American. That's just who I am, right? And then obviously there are other people for whom keeping that connection is more important.
Well, I certainly think that's a great like transition to talk about food, right? Because the Chifa cuisine is predicated on that, right? Taking Asian ingredients, mixing them with a little bit of Latin flair, and then all of a sudden you have your ceviches, which is even like a derivative of Nikkei cuisine, which is like, sashimi, Japanese.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that's where, that came from. But yeah, like the introduction of soy sauce and the mixture of ají amarillo, like the red hot chili pepper, red yellow pepper. Those are like prevalent in a lot of, the staples that we grew up eating, comfort foods, the national dishes of Peru, lomo saltado, something like that. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't think it was lost on them. I mean, I think that they sort of picked and choose what they wanted to bring with them. And, just like everywhere where you could miss your home cooking or your grandparents cooking, that stuff really is like transcendental, right? Like really just culture, food, and sports, I think, in the other way, can sort of really, really bring people together. So, I mean, I don't know. That's sort of what HungryWons is really, right? Like in terms of that Peruvian-Chinese connection that we want to identify with, right? I mean, we have like lots of raw content footage of us cooking anything from like, we're trying to make some Peking duck and put a Latin flair on that, or we're making the arroz chaufa that you would find in Lima, Peru, in a little, chifa stall, where they dry the rice and they add the sherry wine and the soy sauce, and so it's all related in a way, and that's why I think we just like traveling and sort of seeing the unique differences, but when you take a step back, it's really the same, right? I mean, everyone has their, my girlfriend is Korean, and we've been dating for 3 years, and some of the food that I've been exposed to is just like amazing, right? And things I've never tried or even thought to try, and things I thought I wouldn't even like, right? Like any fermented food, like kimchi, for example, but now I love it and I make it myself, and there's some buried in the backyard, right? So like, it's just, it's all about like sort of opening your eyes and being, accepting of, of everything.
When I travel to different places, I love to eat Chinese food there and see how it's integrated, and noticing how Chinese cuisine in, say, India versus America versus other places can be quite different. Often it's Cantonese cuisine, right? Because I'm Canto as well. Like us Southern people are the ones who actually left. But there's a lot of variations that take place. And so I'm curious if like Chinese food in America, what I'd call like Chinese American cuisine or Meizhong Cai, is that similar to like what you'd get if you go to a Chinese restaurant in Peru or other parts of Central South America?
I would say, and John, you tell me what you think, but I would say that it's different because in Peru, for example, they put a lot more sazon, which is like flavor, like umami, right, into their food versus the American traditionally. I mean, it changes, right? Like when you go to big cities, people have tried a lot of stuff, right? And there's a lot of stuff. But you go to like where John Deere was in Iowa or whatever, like it's pretty standard where you're gonna get if you go to a takeout Chinese. It's not gonna be like depth of flavor and like, yeah, like my wife Nobu, she went to school up in SUNY Geneseo, which is like northern New York, right? And she was like, "This is the biggest mistake I ever made going to this school because they only have 2 Chinese takeout places, and it's like General Tso's chicken and lo mein, and I literally had to go home like once every 2 months just to eat real rice."
Yeah, I mean,
So
that's the reason why I haven't left Flushing in so long. It's because the food is so good here.
Yeah.
But, you know, like even walking in, you know, I can go back to 2009 in the Stamp Student Union, right next to Testudo, the PF Chang's there. And every one of my, I mean, they're offering a side of white rice and a heavily deep fried crusted protein where it's like, you know, 70% batter, 30% protein, or 20% protein,
And then
10%
sugar.
mystery meat, right? And then like that is the, you know, that's what they think real, authentic, you know, Chinese food is, and that's a shame, right? So that's, I think, why, you know, any chance we get, whether we're with friends or family or just strangers, we're preaching. We're like, hey, have you tried dim sum? Have you had xiaolong bao? Have you, you know, like, why are you looking at chicken feet differently than you're looking at pork rind? Like, you know, things like that. And yeah, I mean, in New York, obviously the food is amazing. But yes, it is different, like Andrew says, right? I mean, we could just talk about the different like microclimates and regions of Peru that will afford you just like a vast, you know, array of just like produce, right? Like, or different proteins. So it really depends where you are, right? If you're in a desert region, you're not going to be making, you know, fresh ceviche every day.
you gotta
But
get
if
some
you're
guinea
living on
pig,
the
man.
coast,
Some spicy
I
big
mean,
rat.
you're probably going to be eating, you know, some cuy, some fried guinea pig, which, you know, tastes just like chicken, just, you know, with a couple claws and some, you know, some teeth staring back at you. But, you know, I mean, that's sort of a problem, I think, with, you know, what's going on with like sort of the, you know, the food in this country, where it's like, we don't really know where it comes from. We should really have more of an attachment to it, right? And like, you know, to like our guy Joe Rogan, you know, if you shoot it, you'll appreciate it a little more, right? And you kill it and you skin it.
True.
Right. So, you know, it all comes full circle, whether it's, you know, the sustainability of it or, you know, and you just feel better about yourself knowing where.
Yeah. I feel like Chinese food is getting better. And I don't want to just like harp on Chinese food, but it's just because I'm Chinese, I guess. Here in Seattle, there's a ton of like, I use this term like affectionately, fobs, like rich Chinese people straight from the mainland coming over, driving sports cars. I'm stereotyping now, but like going to universities, coding at Microsoft and Amazon. And so there are parts of town here where there's just like lots of legit Chinese restaurants that are serving food just like in China, and that you're getting into regional cuisine. So we've got like Xi'an noodles, we've got, you know, Sichuanese cuisine. We've got a lot of different things going on, and I love that. And I imagine that's happening. I think I've seen it happening, obviously in New York, but other cities as well. And it sounds like the time is right to introduce people to like Chinese diasporic cuisine. And it sounds like that's something that you're really interested in doing.
Yeah, man. I mean, honestly, we've been to, and Mark, you tell us what your take is, but like, we've been to like, I don't know, 30 Chinatowns around the world. And I was just in Hong Kong recently, in Macau, and I have to unfortunately say that the Chinese food now in Vancouver is better quality than Hong Kong. Now, I don't know if that has to do with where the money is, and there's so much migration of rich Chinese to Vancouver and the Seattle area, but, and also kind of the, you know, all the unrest is happening in Hong Kong and the max exodus of banks and corporations because of the political climate. But when I go to Vancouver, I'm blown away because I'm like, the quality is so good, and the variety is so good. It's better than New York. It's better than San Francisco. Like, I gotta say, Vancouver is the best, in my opinion. I don't know about you. What do you think?
Vancouver's got it going on, man. And yeah, partly when you've got a large number of rich Chinese people who want to eat well, the chefs will follow, right? And Vancouver is like one of the hot spots of like hot Chinese money, right? Yeah, it's funny. I feel like a year or two ago, David Chang was involved in this debate and conversation in New York City around. I think it was in like one of Ugly Delicious or one of his things on fried
I
rice,
know exactly what you're talking about, and I was going
and,
to reference that as well. Yeah.
and people were complaining, right? Like, oh, white people saying this that about like what Chinese food is. It's like that's not happening in Seattle, man. In Seattle, you got a bunch of white folks going into Dough Zone, like Dough zone. Terrible name, fantastic Xiaolongbao and like Shengjianbao. And white people being like, yo, this is like the real deal. I love this stuff. And getting very into, delicate regional classic Chinese dumplings and dishes, right? Yibin noodles, for example. And I love that that's happening. So I feel like good food is good food. And people, as they expand their palates beyond the simple delights of General Tso's chicken, are gonna like recognize eventually the greatness of Chinese cuisine and its myriad variants. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but the question is also like, I feel like you said it's happening in urban cities, but how, I don't know because I don't live in Indiana and Ohio. Is it happening there to the same scale? Probably not, right?
Probably, that's true. I imagine it takes time and like trends, if it follows sort of like an adoption curve model. Like when I was living in the cornfields of Iowa, um, yeah, we didn't have like really great xiaolongbao available. I had to go to Chicago for that. But they were getting their first bowl place, right? Like that is a radical notion in Midwestern America, the notion of eating a bowl with a grain like rice as opposed to it on a roll, right?
Mm-hmm.
These things, some of them are fads, some of them are more like long-standing in terms of how they shape and expand America's diet, right? I think Americans and this country's relationship with food is very like it's like able to move and be moved in radical directions, right? Like the food that we eat now versus 10, 20 years ago is really different. Whereas, for example, when I lived in China, I feel like Chinese people have been eating basically variations of the same thing for thousands of years. And it's not going to change that radically. Like 10 years from now, Chinese people are going to be like, you know what? We're not into rice. We're just going to like skip rice and like go carbless, right? That's not going to happen. And that makes it kind of interesting being in America because like I didn't eat smoothies for breakfast when I was a kid, but like now lots of people do it, including myself.
Yeah,
Exactly. I
yeah.
mean,
But
you bring a congee, you bring some chicken chook to, in a little thermostat, and you bring it, when you're in elementary school, like you said, you're getting looks from all over the place. And, we dealt with that a lot growing up, and things like, I never had what was it? A Pop-Tart until I was like 25 years old. I didn't know what a Pop-Tart was. Like people are going crazy over these Pop-Tarts and putting them in their freezers and stuff. And I'm like, I'll just stick with my ramen, and I'll make a little sous vide egg and cut up some scallions and leave me alone.
But the funny thing is, like, we love food and cooking, but our parents never really cooked. It was our grandparents who taught us like recipes because they lived with us when we were younger, like middle school, elementary school years. And I still remember to this day, like some of my grandfather's passed, and our grandmother is like 98 right now. She lives in New York, and she's still alive. But
Nice.
like what I remember when I was like in elementary school is like coming off the bus at like 2:30, right? And they would have like a feast that they were finishing for two people. They cooked lunch every day for themselves, and they would have like, no joke, like 25 bowls to wash. And I was like, who did you cook for? And it was just like a normal Wednesday lunch. But because they didn't have anything else to do, this was their passion, and they're like, this drove them, like preparing what their menu would be for next week. And then they would eat it, and they wouldn't finish it. They would save some, and then we would taste it. But do you remember that, Jonah? Like how many dishes there would be at like 3:00 in the afternoon from
Yeah,
their lunch? Yeah.
like the only correlation is like, going to, Korean barbecue and just getting a million plates of banchan, right? Like really micro, like tapa style, right? They keep coming, and they're free, and you can ask for refills. So
I think that one thing that because Asian food, you talk about Chinese food, but then Asian, a lot of people can't even distinguish, right? But like one thing, and this has been discussion for a while, but like, why isn't Chinese food in America elevated, and why can't they charge $40 a plate like they do for Italian food or French food or whatever, right? But I feel like Korean Americans have learned the art because they spent more money. Like you go to a nice Korean bakery and they charge you $5 for a croissant. You go to like a Hong Kong style Chinese bakery and it's still $1.25. But it's because they didn't invest in the marketing. The quality, like it's not as clean as the Korean place, and you pay for that. People see that. So I feel like Korean Americans have really learned to like tap that market, like a more traditional Western restaurants do. But I don't think Chinese, the majority of Chinese, right? There are younger people doing it, but like the majority, they still haven't done that, right?
But I think that's one. I think that's
man.
one side of it. The other side is just like, but you still need to like, right, put respect on the name, right? Because you can't tell me that making a French bouillabaisse is more labor intensive than making a pho or making a congee base or making, you know, a dashi, like or fermenting anything, right? So, yeah, I mean, I guess it's like ebb and flows with what people like, what the consumer likes. The Koreans have definitely been able to sort of get ahead of that curve, and you can see it. I mean, like you said. No, like I can go get an inadi roll on the corner of Flushing, or where I'm staying right now in Huntington, which is where we grew up, our parents grew up, right? I can go right down to Main Street and find something very similar. I probably couldn't have done that not even 5 years ago, right? So
I was going to apply like a class lens to it, where there's this great documentary you guys might have seen called The Search for General Tso. It's like a conceit, but it's really about like the story of the Chinese American like food restaurant industry, right? Where you've got a lot of poor Chinese, typically from like the South, Fujian, Guangdong, that area, coming over, learning to cook food for white people, and then like being like going from Chinatown in New York to like bumfuck Nebraska to the one Chinese restaurant, right? To serve up the, you know, battered meat. And, you know, these are folks who aren't thinking about how do I market and like elevate cuisine to like nail that like rich fattish market of people to become the new acai bowl or whatever, right? This is folks just like churning out that food for the masses. When you're talking about the Korean stuff, I'm thinking, are you thinking of like Tour and some of these like faux French Korean bakeries that are like
Paris
real
baguette,
nicely packaged?
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I think
or
that's
even
more
like, yeah, they have like high-end Korean barbecue where like you get a tiny piece of premium beef and it's like $70, and I was like, no Chinese place, hot pot place would ever get away doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that like there's a few things at play. I'm just spitballing here, but like Tour, these are like sophisticated, like large companies, right? Who started in Korea, have expanded all over Asia. Korean bakeries are like killing it in China from last time I've been there, and America's like only the latest in their like expansion plans, where they've learned to like target that middle class, upper middle class with white people food, right? Like people associate French cuisine and Italian cuisine with class and paying a premium, right? They haven't learned to do that with like something that should be elevated. I think Xiaolongbao and like Din Tai Fung is like pioneering for the West the notion that this is
ramen,
like
definitely.
elevated food, and yeah, for sure.
Ramen you can start paying nowadays. People like there's some places charging you $24 for a bowl of ramen.
Yeah,
which is kind of crazy because we were just recently in Tokyo and you get a really good bowl for $4.
But like you're right. I mean, I love that like you can make a cheap street food version of good food, but you can have elevated experiences, and we can have our cuisine, by I say our, in this case I'm talking about Chinese cuisine, be recognized as worthy of that kind of respect and celebration as an art form that like in the West that we do with, you know, obviously French and Italian cuisine.
So, but Mark, what was your growing up like in terms of, it was Malaysian Chinese mix? It was like Malay and Chinese?
Ethnically 100% Chinese, but you know, Chinese Malaysians have their own culture, right? They've been in Malaysia hundreds of years. Sometimes there's in different waves. My three of my four grandparents were born in China, so a more recent wave. Very southern. So like my mom's side is Hainanese, my dad's side is Hakka. And you know, the Hakka have their own cuisine, the Hainanese have their own cuisine. And in Malaysia, you know, the groups, so often by language, so the Hainanese do their own thing, the Hakka do their own thing. They fight with each other. they're known for different things. Like the Hainanese, I can't remember, but like the Hainanese own the coffee shops and the Hakka own the like little merchant stores, for example. Um, and then a lot of like Chinese in Malaysia, you guys may know this, but being Chinese in Malaysia is not good. After the British left / got kicked out, things got very racial. And so we've had a Malay Nationalist Party run Malaysia. It's even in the name of the country since basically independence. And so there are quotas, there's a lot of affirmative action stuff such that if you are Chinese, it makes things harder. And also, like, Chinese have often been the merchant class, right? And so some of them are rich and it's easy to target them. And so at various points there were riots and Chinese were killed. Same thing in Indonesia. So a lot of them leave, right, to go to Australia, like my parents, or New Zealand, or America. But yeah, we have our own cuisine too. It's mostly Chinese stuff, but with some influences of like Malay chilies and sambal and stuff like that.
Cool. No, because I think of that movie my wife loves, Crazy Rich Asians, and all the scenes, whether it's Singapore or Malaysia or they shot probably all over, but
the mansion was in Kuala Lumpur, I hear.
Yeah, but the opulence is just crazy too. I've been to Bangladesh, I've worked in India too, where it's like the extremes are so extreme in Southeast Asia because there's such rich people, and then there's equally as poor, way poorer than here. And they live side by side almost, like the mansion overlooks the slum, right?
Yeah.
And it's just in your face. But you made me think of 2 points. One is, have you seen the show Hell on Wheels?
No.
Oh my God. Jonathan, have you seen it?
No.
Oh shit. Yo, so Hell on Wheels, man, it's a great show. It was on AMC for like 5 seasons. It's like really good actor. The guy do you watch Star Trek, the new one?
I'm not a big Star Trek guy, to be honest. It's cool though.
All right, I don't know if we can be friends after this, but no, but anyway, so in Hell on Wheels, they talk about the expansion of the railroad in the U.S. from both the East Coast and the West Coast, and how different immigrant groups built it. So in the West, it was a lot of Asians, and then on the other side was a lot of like Europeans, and then there was also Mormons and other people. But what it got was when they did the season on Chinese laborers from the West Coast building the Transcontinental Railroad, it was so cool because even within these tiny like traveling communities that were really dirty and crazy, they would be like food stalls, Asian food stalls, and the white people would like love it, right? This is going back to like 1850s, and I thought that show did a really good job of showing like it's just crazy how you could tell so many stories and connect it through food, because you gotta eat like no matter where you are, and you make memories out of that,
Oh,
I mean,
man,
just think
cool.
of how much of a savage your grandparents have to be to just like leave everything that they've ever owned from a certain place, take their whole life, and just uproot it and go somewhere completely new where they don't speak the language, where they don't know anybody, and then try to make a life from that point.
Right. With so little resources compared to us too, right? I mean, it's mind blowing. Some of my grandparents were illiterate, right? And a lot of it was just like desperation, man. I mean, China was dirt fucking poor, and it was really, really hard. People were hungry. But yeah, it is amazing when you think about it. I want to circle back, guys, to talk about childhood, man. So you all have a Chinese Peruvian dad, you have a Colombian mother, you're growing up in New York City. That sounds like the best place to grow up if you are what you are, like in terms of it being other people like you and accepted. How was that?
John, you want to start? I have a funny story.
Well, it started in Queens, but for a very short time. My parents were in Corona before I was born. I think the reason why they decided to get a little bit of a bigger place and move out to the North Shore of Long Island was obviously because of more space and me coming along. But so I guess that's like two different things, right? Andrew can speak to, I guess, his time in Queens, but he was only like 4 or 5 at the time. But yeah, I mean, growing up in Huntington is like, we were lucky at that time. My dad was pretty well established. We had a nice house with a backyard, and, we weren't poor and we weren't rich, right? We got by, but, all of my neighbors and my friends were white, right? There was a distinct line between the center of town that sort of divided Huntington Station and all the Latinos and all the Blacks that lived in that area from all the affluent people that lived by the bay. But we all went to the same school. We all played on the same teams. So, I mean, in a way, I think maybe growing up in Queens would have been a little bit easier than growing up in Huntington. But there, I mean, definitely different. I mean, we did spend a lot of time going back and forth. You know, my dad's practice, we spent a lot of time there, and a lot of our family was in also in Queens and in Flushing area as well. So, you know, we weren't totally, you know, like mind fucked by that, I guess.
Yeah, I would say that this is one of the reasons I never moved back to Long Island, or even the city. I mean, the city is just so freaking expensive now. But living in Maryland, like the suburbs of DC, you get a lot more, not just working class, but people from a lot of different areas because of, you know, DC. You know, either they're here for school or like some type of connection with their country and the government here or whatever. But I think that's something I love so much more than Long Island per se. Long Island is like beautiful, right? And it's pretty wealthy, but you don't, like when I go home to Huntington sometimes, I don't feel like this is someplace I would want to have a family, just because everything is nice, but you don't get that diversity of experience. Like you get a lot of rich people that have been around the world, but you don't get the actual people who like just moved there 5 years ago or 10 years ago anymore. And I think that's really cool. Like my neighborhood here in Silver Spring is like Ethiopian, Guatemalan, you know, like Somalian, Vietnamese. And I think that's really, it's a really cool thing versus just like, you know, like parts of Huntington are very like, for example, just white or Jewish or, you know, that type of thing. And I mean, we had friends and everything, but it wasn't as diverse as it's changed now, right? But not like 25 years ago.
At that time, I think my cousins were also living in Huntington. So another Chinese, you know, this is my dad's sister's kids who were Chinese ethnically, but also growing up in the similar town. So we like spent a lot of time with them. But to Andrew's point, outside of that like immediate circle, which just happened to be Chinese, there were not many other Chinese kids going to, you know, at the time, Suffolk or Syosset or Huntington High School, stuff like that. So, I mean, yeah, like we had to sort of leave Huntington to get that experience, to feel closer, right? We would go to the dim sums every weekend in Flushing, right, at 10 a.m. To meet the extended family and do stuff like that. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's super weird. Like that's what I think I mean, specifically me, the challenge is just the identity, right? Like, what am I? How can I fit in? How can I change myself to sort of fit in? And for me, it was like, I love hip hop and I love sports and that's how I sort of integrated myself there.
Yeah. But the funny thing is we also spent a lot of time in Queens. Like my parents moved back to Queens and then the funny thing is like when you go to immigrant neighborhoods in Queens, I don't know if you're familiar with the 7 train. So the 7 train runs from Flushing, which is like where the Met Stadium is and the great Chinese food, all the way down to Times Square. So it's like the main line, right? It's the purple line, a 7 train. And I grew up on the 7 train because I went and I worked at my dad's office every single weekend for like 10 years, right? And summers, right? So I would take the train everywhere into the city, whatever. But the funny thing about immigrant populations, especially newer ones, especially Hispanic and Latino, is they don't ask you do you speak Spanish? They just start talking to you in Spanish. It's like implied. If you look any bit possible to be able to speak Spanish, they just start talking to you in Spanish, which I thought was really funny, right? Because in DC, like if you go to a more formal, like for example, embassy of Spain or Argentina, they don't really do that, right? They're like, they're kind of surprised that I speak Spanish, right? Huh. But when I'm on the 7 train, they're just like, yeah, you better. It's like implied that you speak Spanish if you're on this train, you know. So
we're sort of ethnically ambiguous, right? I mean, Mark, like if we didn't tell you where we were from, what would you say we are, right? Like I get a lot of Filipino, right? I mean, it's summertime. I've been playing a lot of tennis. I'm super dark, but
right,
you know, normally I'm pale.
Yeah, you guys aren't like people look at me and you know they know and they're right that I am East Asian. And I've gotten a few random things, but like they know what my bloodline is. I guess you could say it that way. Whereas for you guys, yeah, I wouldn't have known. I think the main way I knew is your last name sounds, vaguely Asian, and I can tell you have some Asian heritage about you. But you're right, you guys do look much more ethnically ambiguous, so people wouldn't jump to not. I imagine you speaking Spanish is not a radical thing to them as much as it would be for me to speak Spanish to them. You know what I mean? Did you ever feel like you needed to be a certain way? Did you feel like when you were growing up in Long Island to fit in, did you have to like de-emphasize some parts of your heritage, overemphasize others, or like try and be white? How did that play out?
I think it was a mixture of both. I mean, our parents, we're super lucky, right? I mean, we were afforded a lot of things that, a lot of people in the world aren't afforded. Going to soccer practices on the weekends, sometimes if we're not at our dad's office, or, being able to take a vacation down to Florida. I mean, in the school systems, again, like there were just not many people for me, like even just looking around, I can't be like, hey, can I go after school? Like, even if I smoke cigarettes behind something, like I wouldn't go to the Asian clique over there. Like I would have to, again, and that's why I got into sports. Like I found that, I was good at academics. I didn't really have to try. Like I was naturally smart, and people gravitated towards me because I guess I try to like make a clown out of myself and be funny.
Wait, hold on. Naturally smart. Where the fuck does that statement come from?
Well, we're talking like, middle school, elementary school,
I would
high
not
school.
say you're naturally smart.
I mean, I have my BA in economics, but I think I got a 2.8 my second semester. So we'll not talk about that. But, it was like, it's challenging. Like, what do you do? Like, I never liked soccer, but I went to soccer classes because all of my white friends were doing that in the, in the travel leagues. And I mean, and yeah, like I can't even speak to, like, my dad was working so hard that I don't think he ever came to any of those sporting events ever, because he was working 6 days a week. Right. So like, as I'm getting driven by my mom, or getting in a cab or carpooling with someone, and then just getting to the field, and like, they have a whole contingent and a whole family support system, and I'm just sitting there, like eating orange slices by myself. So,
but I remember Papi going to your basketball games for sure, man. I remember that.
I mean, maybe a few here and there. Maybe I guess my point is, I mean, I mean, he was there, but not as much as he wasn't there.
It sounds like you all are saying Long Island is kind of, there are different races, there are immigrant communities, but it's stratified. Like, how did that play out for you all? Like, I found later in life that I gravitated to make friends with other immigrants because we have a similar experience. But I grew up in a like whitey McWhite place, and so all my friends, by and large, were white. And then even in suburban Maryland, most of my friends are white, and I was just like the odd one out. I was just kind of like the racially different one. Whereas for you guys, like, did you have a lot of friends who weren't white?
No, I would say other than our family, most of our friends were white. And that only changed when I went to Maryland and kind of started making friends with people from other places. Obviously, my whole family is very diverse. On my mom's side, they're Colombian, right? So it was that whole group. And then on my dad's side, it was Chinese. But we were the only ones of my parents' siblings that married someone that wasn't Chinese. So all of our cousins, we were like really close to them growing up, but there was something always missing because they didn't speak Spanish, right? They only spoke Cantonese. But we still built a lot of forts together. We had this game where you pick a t-shirt and the color, and that color you had to pick your animal. I still remember this. I was like 7 years old, and that animal would be your fighting animal for the rest of the year. And I could never pick a good color, man. I could never pick a good color. But going back to this point of also like Asian families and work ethic and the traditions of career versus life and stuff like that, I just moved my dad and my mom down to Maryland 2 days ago from New York. And my dad retired 5 days ago from 35 years of being an optometrist and eye
Right
doctor.
on.
And we're super proud of him, but my mom's getting older, and then we're having our first kid, and we want them to be closer.
Definitely.
So we made the sacrifice and like helped them pack up and move down. But yo, that was like, I never thought, because I haven't lived with my parents in so many years, well, in the same city as my parents in so many years. So it's definitely going to be a change. And I don't know if you can speak to this, Mark, like, do you miss not having, is your family near you or no?
No, my parents are in Australia. They retired, so they live off the Gold Coast, like near Brisbane, north of Sydney, and then my brother is still in Howard County, Maryland. But yeah, I think as it's something that we're currently talking about. Like I just mentioned, just got married and talking about where we're gonna, you know, settle down, raise a family, that kind of stuff. Family's integral. And one thing that's cool, I guess, about your situation is you did have extended family, right? Like you had cousins. It sounds like on both your mom and dad's sides. I didn't. All of my
Yeah.
extended family, by and large, is in Malaysia and Singapore. And so that is something that I would like to have. I'm glad that you all had that. I'm curious, like for you guys, we've talked more about the Chinese side of your heritage, maybe because I'm Chinese, but like if you had to split it out, I don't know if you have ever thought about this way, like what percentage of your brain or your culture is, say, Chinese versus Latino, versus like, and you can split that out versus like American or white. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I would say, other than the food aspect, my brain is I feel less Chinese than I feel Peruvian or Colombian, mixed with American, obviously. But like, because I like talking to people and opening up and being more vulnerable versus like, traditional Asian where it's like you don't really open up, at least in the beginning, right? And it's a lot more traditional in the sense of like, you work hard, you get good grades, you get a good job that pays a lot of money, and then you'll be happy. Versus kind of like I think that's what separates me from a lot of other people is that like I made that decision a long time ago where I was like, yo, you can die at any point in life, and like you should just experience different things. And obviously, you got to make some money, right? But if money is your end goal, I think you're going to be really dissatisfied at the end of your life when all you got is your memories and experiences. And that's why I'm doing HungryWons and doing different things because it's just like it sucks to go into an office from 8 a.m. to 6 o'clock every single day. But I don't know about you, John. How do you identify? So then, to go back to your original question, I would say I'm like 20% Chinese. I would say I'm like 40% Hispanic, and then the rest American.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I would deviate too much from that. I mean, me and Andrew were both in ESL until we were about 4 years old. So,
okay.
So think about that as an outwardly Asian looking kid with a big head. And, we're in ESL until we're 4 years old in a really affluent white town, right? So that's confusing. But yeah, I mean, again, aside from the cooking aspect, a lot of the Asian stuff that I do, I mean, everything else is in Spanish pretty much. A lot of like my closer friends and families of friends are all Latin. I love dancing. We do all the music stuff. There's always salsa playing constantly around whenever my mom's around, and we grew up primarily speaking Spanish and English. Right?
I was going to ask, what language do you guys speak with your parents?
So it's mainly Spanish, and we're talking Spanish and answering in English.
Yeah. So this is actually really funny. This is kind of something that I've been thinking about is that I've always had a block. I grew up speaking Spanish, and like Jonathan said, I was put in ESL when I was like 5, 6, 7, because they taught me Spanish first, and they want me to learn Spanish. But then my English wasn't as good early on, right? And then something clicked inside of me too, where after like age 7 or 8, I felt weird talking to my parents in Spanish. So they would always talk to us in Spanish, but I always replied in English. And it was like a psychological block almost where I didn't feel I was good enough to talk to them always in Spanish. But
it was
your
just Spanish wasn't good enough, or that you wanted to be American and that meant speaking English?
I think it was a little bit of both. Like I wanted to like be able to speak good English, right? But also as the years went by and I was like 12, 13, 14, my Spanish was no longer as good as a 13-year-old in Peru would have been, right? Because I was in America, right? Now, they always talked to us, all my aunts and my mom and my dad in Spanish, but in high school years, we always replied in English, right? But then that changed because doing VOSH, I have no problems talking to other people fluently in Spanish and in my work. But to this day, it's hard for me to talk fully in Spanish to my parents because I just feel like it's not good enough subconsciously to them. And it's a weird thing. Like I've tried to do it and it just doesn't feel right. Right. I don't know.
What about your extended family? Like, are you cool talking to your, grandparents?
Yes.
Aunties,
yeah.
uncles?
Like my cousins and like my aunt who's Colombian, my cousin that's in Colombia, all our family friends who are in Peru, and our extended family in Peru. I talk to all of them in Spanish. The only ones I don't reply in Spanish are my two parents.
Interesting.
And I don't know, it's weird. And I think it's the same for you, John.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from another angle, like sort of, I guess I felt like a little bit of shame in the sense of like, if I'm getting dropped off by my mom, I don't want to be that kid who has a mom who can't speak English that good, right?
Right.
Or, and then all of a sudden I'm seeing repercussions with that in school, or just getting judged in a way. But then, after getting older and having life experiences, you're like, fuck that, right? Like, this is who I am, and and that's it. Like, take it or leave it, right?
Do you guys speak any Canto or any Mandarin?
Siu.
Yeah. He's all hyping.
Nice.
I know.
That's pretty much
it. I mean, we know a lot. The funny thing is, like, we learned most of our Cantonese from our grandmother, but this was back like 25 years ago. And then we haven't really been able to practice it because my dad only speaks to us in English or Spanish, right? But the only time we really use it is when we're going out to eat, because we can name all of our favorite dishes, because that's important. That's really what's really important.
It really is.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Did your dad ever consider, I don't know if you all have ever talked to him about it, like, it sounds like it was important to your parents that you speak Spanish and they succeeded in that way, and you guys have a connection to that part of your heritage. Did they ever debate whether he would speak to you in Canto or your mom would speak to you in Spanish?
Well,
something like that?
But my dad's way more comfortable. Even his Chinese is only like a grade school level, right? Because he spoke it fluently at home, but he was never, like, he can't write in Chinese.
Right.
Because he was born in Peru, right? So his first language is really Spanish, then English, then Cantonese, right?
Got it.
But the funny thing about that, though, is that what was I thinking about was my grandparent. It was funny, like they spoke so much better Spanish than English, and I guess it was so far in their life when they came to the U.S. They were already like in their 60s that they were just like, fuck this, we're gonna speak Cantonese and Spanish. So when we were really young, there would be sentences that were like one word in each language mixed together, and we wouldn't even know we're doing it. But it's because like we don't know that last word in Cantonese, so we would just say it in Spanish instead. Yeah, that happened all the time.
Chinglish, Chinese, English, and Spanish. That's what we call it.
Nice. Chinglish I've heard is like Chinese and English, but you all had to have an extra flair to it. That's really cool, man. I'm curious if you guys have any like funny memories or stories of growing up that relate to the fact that, you have such a varied cultural mix going on.
So a good friend of mine who I'm still friends with, I think we were born in the same month, in the same hospital, the same year. In middle school, we had like a pact with our families where one weekend, Jonah will go hang out with your family and see what you do. And this is a half English, half European white guy, right? And then one weekend he would come with us. So
who is this guy?
This is Mike Semeka, our good friend of ours. So like, this was like the first time I ever went fishing on a fishing boat was on one of these trips with his family. And then we took him to dim sum for the first time in Flushing, like in Main Street. This is like, a ginger-haired white guy with freckles in the middle of, 37th Avenue. All the dim sum carts are strolling by him, like the vapors getting into his eyeglasses, and he just is the only white person there. So,
that's when you held the chicken feet right up to his face.
Exactly. And like, I was just like recently talking to him about it, and and he was like, yeah, like I didn't know what it was, but it smelled really good, and I ate it and it was delicious, but I never would have even considered trying it, if I was here with my family. We wouldn't even be in this zip code, right?
Yeah.
Fun. Right on.
I think I love just introducing people, not even from like a judging point of view, but just like it's so fun to see someone try something where they just never heard about it, or they wouldn't have tried it on their own, and then like years later you introduce it and they're just ordering it like bonchon chicken wings, like the Korean
I love
chicken
bonchon.
wings. Like, I remember like having this debate. I was like, I don't know how you're still eating fucking buffalo chicken wings when there is Korean chicken wings out in the world. Like, you shouldn't even be eating. And then like, I was telling this girl, Megan, she was my roommate. And then I brought it home one day. I was like, you have to try it. There's like different flavors, spicy, soy, ginger, whatever. And at our wedding, she married us, and she was like, I remember her mentioning, like, when she came to congratulate, she was like, "Yo, I will forever remember Bonchan, and like, thank you for that, and I owe you my life." And
That was your
you
gift
know,
to me.
because their slogan is "fried healthy" because it's fried twice.
What would you say is like any advice that you would have for your younger self at points, I don't know, of like confusion or self-doubt, whether related to the fact that you're of different heritages than like the mainstream American one or otherwise?
John, why don't you start with that?
I mean, I think, just a general motto in life is that you're going to have your ups and downs, right? And you just have to sort of, go with the punches. And specifically in our case, where it's like a case of, finding our identity, whether it's through food, through sports, through our social friends. I mean, just, I guess, stick to your roots, right? I mean, don't be ashamed like maybe I was back in the day, and really like, I guess, reaffirm who you are. And, at the end of the day, we're just human beings, and, we just want to share that story. And that's why food is, again, that like transcendental thing that can maybe break down some of these barriers or help people in similar situations in different parts of the world who are struggling with the same things. So yeah, I mean, just come eat some of our food, and we can, we'll share a beer, some pisco sour, and then it all will be good.
That sounds like an excellent way to live. How about you,
Yeah,
Andrew?
Mark. No, I would say, yeah, I would say, I mean, sometimes I think about it. I'm having a daughter in September, my first daughter.
Congrats,
Her
man.
name is going to be Maya. And like, what would I tell her? Like, what would be like the biggest advice I could tell her? And obviously, like, words don't do it justice because it has to be like your life and your experience, right? But like, one of the things I would tell her is like, in order to be happy, you gotta be comfortable with yourself, whatever that is. But a lot of times you don't know yourself, so it takes time you just gotta be willing to try things that are comfortable, uncomfortable, and then you kind of get to know yourself. And then
Yeah.
once you know yourself, then you can kind of be happy because you're just like, this is me, this is my authentic self, this is what I like, what I don't like. And like Jonathan said, just like movies and music, I think the third thing of food really can connect people because you don't even need to say it. Could be completely non-verbal communication. Like, how they say most communication is non-verbal anyway,
Yeah.
right? But when something tastes good, just your facial expression, the sounds, like, you can't beat that. And I think that's what we're trying to do at HungryWons, where we want to show people the story and we want to see those non-verbal reactions in addition to the verbal ones.
Oh man, the reaction videos on YouTube, I can see it already,
Yeah.
man.
So like, but that's what I would tell my younger self, is to like not be scared to try, and not be scared to fail, but also to be vulnerable and to be like, admit when you're wrong. I think a lot of older generations, even my dad, my grandparents, they're so hard for them to admit things that are wrong. And the faster you can do that, the faster you can kind of mature and be comfortable with yourself, really. Because until you admit like your shortcomings, you cannot get to a better place. So I think that's kind of the advice I would give.
Right on. Last piece, where can people learn more about you guys and HungryWons?
John, why don't you tell them?
Yeah, so you can find us on our website at www.hungrywons.com. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Please subscribe. Leave us a comment. If you don't like us playing with the chicken feet, we can edit that out next time. But yeah, we do a lot of different things. Not just food. We just have good conversations with people like you, Mark, where we're just, again, sort of finding like-minded people out there who who have an interesting story to tell.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah,
thanks a
man.
lot for your time, guys. This is super fun.
Thanks, Mark. It was great catching up.
Okay, so that was my discussion with Andrew and Jonah Won. I really enjoyed the different perspectives talking to the two siblings. They're obviously very close and have an infectious enthusiasm for food, family, and their culture. It was fascinating learning about Chifa cuisine and the history of Chinese and Japanese communities in Peru. I love the way they proudly fuse being Latino, Chinese, and American. Their family strikes me as a classic example of the American dream, stretching from China, Peru, and Colombia to New York City. If you liked this episode, please consider recommending it to a friend. For more information about the show, please visit facebook.com/howtosecondgen, and thank you for listening.